Trinidad and Tobago is home to a diverse array of Baptist groups, each with its own unique history and traditions. Among these groups are the London Baptists, the Independent Baptists, the Fundamental Baptists, and the Spiritual Shouter Baptists. The Spiritual Baptists, in particular, have a deeply embedded and affluent history that can be traced back to the African diaspora. Their story is intricately intertwined with the experiences of enslaved Africans brought to the Caribbean and the migration of the Americans. The Americans were a group of former American slaves who had supported Britain during the American War of Independence. Following the War of 1812, in which the British recruited these colored Marines, the Americans were promised freedom and land. The Americans were organized into 6 military companies, and following the war, they were granted land, primarily in South Trinidad, with only the 5th and 6th companies retaining their original company names to this day. The term American itself was a derivative of their pronunciation of the word American, reflecting their unique linguistic heritage. Upon their arrival in Trinidad between 1815 and 1816, the American settlers brought with them their Baptist faith, which had originated within the Orthodox Baptist denomination. Collaborating with English missionaries from the Baptist Missionary Society, known as the London Baptists, as well as internal influences such as African tribal beliefs introduced through intermarriages, the Americans gradually evolved their Baptist practices into the spiritual Baptist tradition that is observed today. This fusion of various cultural and religious influences has shaped the unique and vibrant spiritual practices of the Spiritual Baptists in Trinidad, creating a community that continues to preserve and celebrate its rich heritage. Amid the early years of the 20th century, Spiritual Baptists encountered harsh treatment and bias. In 1917, the colonial administration of Trinidad and Tobago enacted the Shouters Prohibition Ordinance, prohibiting the religious customs of the Spiritual Baptists. Their energetic worship practices were deemed disruptive and unconventional by the authorities. Any individual found guilty of violating this ordinance faced a fine of $240 upon summary conviction. The rationale behind the ordinance stemmed from the shouters' boisterous singing, bell ringing, and other lively expressions that were perceived to disturb the peace. Their worship ceremonies involved dancing, shouting, trembling, and falling to the ground in convulsions, behaviors deemed inappropriate by the more established and conservative factions in society. The traditional churches considered such conduct as barbaric and uncivilized. Moreover, there was apprehension about the growing number of individuals leaving mainstream churches to join the Spiritual Baptist movement. The police, who had been targeting the Baptists for some time, sought to silence their activities. In order to evade persecution and scrutiny, the Shouters Baptists made a strategic decision to alter their name to Spiritual Baptist. This subtle change symbolized a shift in focus towards the spiritual essence of their beliefs, distancing themselves from the more contentious practices that had drawn negative attention. Despite facing severe persecution, the Spiritual Baptists persevered against overwhelming odds. The colonial authorities, particularly the police, frequently resorted to extreme measures, denying their basic human rights and subjecting them to arrests, beatings, and imprisonment for practicing their religion. Forced to seek refuge in the hills and forests to worship in peace, but even there, they were relentlessly chased and mistreated by law enforcement. Notwithstanding the persistent threats and violence, the resilient Spiritual Baptists managed to survive. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, they engaged in numerous legal battles and endeavored to challenge the negative stereotypes associated with their faith. The turning point arrived with the emergence of Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler as a prominent labor leader. Butler, a devoted Baptist himself and a controversial figure, infused a new sense of respectability to the faith. His public gatherings mirrored the fervor of a Baptist prayer meeting, and his influence gradually shifted perceptions towards the spiritual and Shouter Baptists. Despite his efforts to bring about social and political change, Butler, too, faced imprisonment for his unwavering commitment to his beliefs. Liberation was on the horizon for the spiritual Baptist community in the 1940s, with the emergence of a new leader, Elton George Griffith, who hailed from Grenada. Griffith took up the mantle of championing the cause of the Baptists and spearheaded a movement to repeal the oppressive Shouters Prohibition Ordinance. Under his guidance, the various independent Baptist churches unified to form the West Indian Evangelical Spiritual Baptist Faith. In 1940, as a consolidated front, they presented a petition to the Legislative Council urging for the repeal of the discriminatory ordinance. After years of relentless campaigning and advocacy efforts, their perseverance paid off. On 30th March 1951, the bill to repeal the oppressive ordinance was finally passed, marking a historic moment of liberation for the spiritual Shouter Baptists. At long last, they were granted the freedom to openly practice their religion without fear of persecution. The year 1996 marked another significant triumph for the spiritual Baptists in their ongoing battle for recognition and acceptance. The United National Congress government, recognizing the importance of their struggle and the significance of their history, officially declared an annual public holiday for the community. This holiday, known as Baptist Liberation Day, is celebrated on the anniversary of the repeal of Shouters Prohibition Ordinance on the 30th of March, commemorating the arduous journey towards freedom from persecution and the abolishment of the oppressive 1917 Ordinance. In addition to the public holiday, the Baptists received a generous gesture from the government in the form of 25 acres of land in Maloney. This land was designated for the construction of churches, schools, and a spiritual park, providing a physical space for the community to gather, worship, educate future generations, and honor their cultural heritage. Despite the trials they faced, the spiritual Baptists held steadfast to their beliefs, their traditions, and their sense of community. Their journey is a poignant reminder of the power of faith and the human spirit to rise above adversity. Their story is an inspiration to us all.